known for his deep analysis of Hollywood, geopolitics, and culture. Of course, you all know that already. If you don't know it, you can go to jaysanalysis.com. That's jaysanalysis.com. He's on YouTube at Jay Dyer, and he's on X at J_D007, D007. And you got to get the whole name. I just tried to tag you, Jay, in a post, and I had to type out all the way to J_D0, and then it went, oh, this is the guy you mean. Oh. So you're still shadow banned to some degree, aren't you?
Probably. I mean, there was at one point where it was like straight up shadow ban. You couldn't find me at all.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went away after like a week or two. So,
well, you're there now, and I was really enjoying you and Alex's conversation, because it was just sort of a freewheeling discussion about all sorts of stuff. And I thought one of the interesting things y'all touched on is the persistence of like Scottish people in rebellious activity, and how it just seems to be a part of the nature of Scottish people. And you look at the Texas Revolution, the American Revolution. Canada was mostly settled by Scots. Mm-hmm. There's something about this, the Celtic strain, that sort of bucks under restrictions. What do you draw from that, and what do you think the importance of that is, and just the way things unfold across the world?
Well, we're not inbred, so it doesn't slow us down with slow boy IQ. So some groups do that. Some Middle Eastern groups do that. That kind of slows down things. But, some of the elite writings, there's one I didn't bring with me, which is Charles Galton Darwin's book, I forget the title, Next Million Years. And in that one, he talks about the genetic heritage of European peoples, of British Isle peoples, Scotch peoples, Irish people, etc. And in that, he says that these people are probably the toughest to control, because they kind of just have, maybe through the environment, living in those climates, that kind of, epigenetically kind of, through a microevolution way, you could say, prepared them for very difficult scenarios and a lot of warfare and that kind of stuff. So I think we're a tough people. You can see, like, I still got the red hair here. But yeah, we're a tough people. Some people have even speculated there's this gene that's responsible for that kind of like both madness and like genius. In the Scottish people, there's a name for it. I forget the name of that gene, but yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating theory. But regardless, like, many of these texts say explicitly that Western white European peoples and their religion have to be subverted, and that's what we're undergoing right now. Yeah, and this, I mean, this is an established fact. I mean, this goes back. You can read, Julius Caesar's writings, and he had a lot of trouble with the Germans because they have this proclivity to, you can't just order them to do something. I remember reading a Roman general at some point, and the Romans, you just say, go do this, and they go do it. The Germans, you had to explain why they're doing it. You had to explain what they're going to get for doing it. They weren't just going to follow orders outright. And then, of course, Julius Caesar obviously failed to conquer Britain, and they never really got all the way up to Scotland. They ended up just building, Hadrian's Wall after a couple hundred years of trying. But the reason was because Britain was this generator of conflict against the Romans, right? It was this sort of, I think about it like a video game where you've got all the monsters coming out of the doorway, and you have to go destroy the doorway, or else the monsters are going to keep coming. So, and they would say, people would be sent to Britain to study, under these occult practices, in the same way that, a lawyer might be sent to Rhodes to become a scholar. So, Britain was this headquarters of sort of this Celtic religion that constantly was rebelling against Rome. And so they were like, we're never going to have peace until we destroy the source. And I don't think they ever got to the source. Yeah, well, they're trying that now, right? So the source is, I believe in the soul of a people. If you read, somebody like Oswald Spengler, who was very critical of Hitler, very critical of the Reich, and was eventually, I think he had to leave Germany because he thought Hitler was a tiny little man. But he's considered a right winger and considered kind of one of those historicist thinkers that classifies everything in terms of like cycles, and the Western peoples, he said, would be subverted by the other nations taking over their technology. In other words, the liberal socialist ethos of liberal Christianity would be the undoing of the Western peoples, and that would allow the other people groups that aren't necessarily enemies, but that would be imported to kind of take over. And he said this would be the fate, although he was not for it. The Tavistock Institute actually studied Spengler's Decline of the West to figure out how to weaponize it. Right. Other texts talk about weaponizing this kind of stuff too. Tavistock text, this text right here talks about similar ideas. But basically you have to destroy the individual idea of sovereignty and of building your own, life and family and business. All that has to be destroyed to put you into a collectivist mindset. And one of the key ways that we don't talk about a lot is just guilt, like using guilt, saying that you're guilty for your ancestors' colonialism. There's a great chapter in here that's it's kind of funny. Like Margaret Mead, who's kind of a fraud, Margaret Mead says, you gave people, clothing and they couldn't wear grass skirts anymore. So you made them want stuff.
Right.
That's why it's what she says, like the stupidest argument. Only academics could believe an argument that retarded, right? Right. But that's why colonialism is bad. So yeah, you might have raised everybody's living standards and saved lives with medicine, but you're bad because they don't have grass skirts anymore.
Right.
So greed is somehow bound up with the idea of raising people groups, and I'm pro-colonialism. I think nobody should feel guilt for their ancestors bringing, civilization. Think about, speaking of Mel Gibson, Apocalypto. That's the whole point about Apocalypto is, don't you think those guys were happy when they saw the Spanish coming and like they're running from this giant human sacrifice cult, right? Yeah. And they see like the Spanish coming. It's like, oh, maybe they'll help us.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, obviously the British were just exceptional when it came to colonialism, and just you see how widespread the sort of British diaspora went. And I guess the world wars is the obvious answer, but like, how did they lose it? How did it go so wrong so fast? Because when you had from Australia to South Africa to America, I mean, this was an Anglo world for a while, and there were some very good consequences from that. But then ever since World War II, it's just like it hasn't just collapsed; it's gone the other way. It's like now the white people are just being driven out of everywhere, including their own homelands. Like, how did it go so wrong so fast?
Even though, like, we're supposedly colonialists, it's not our land, but then it's wrong if we don't want other people coming to colonize our land. So it makes no sense. Nothing on the left makes any sense. That's on purpose, by the way. But one of the books I've been covering for many years is Johann Rothschild's amazing book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. It's a geopolitical historical espionage text. It's not really a conspiracy text. He just kind of goes from a lot of the same books. And there's a great chapter that hits on what you're talking about the OSS and CIA psychological warfare and mind control operations that many people don't know about, that we, the U.S., did against Germans. So, and I'm not, again, I'm very conspiratorial when it comes to the narrative of World War II. I think that Hitler played a role in helping to create the dialectic that would lead to the establishment of the nation state of Israel. You couldn't have today's 1948 recognition without what Hitler did. So that's a different topic, but there's a chapter where it says that the OSS really went deep into studying the German psyche. And again, I'm not backing up Hitler. I'm against Hitler. I think he was a bad guy. He was an antichrist in the Orthodox Christian perspective. But it's not accidental that after World War II, the OSS set up all of these propaganda operations in Germany to make sure that Germans would never tap into their native strength, the soul of that people, to become an engineering powerhouse like they were before World War II. So they actually psyop them into like being farmers and stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of weird.
Yeah, and I was
not that it's wrong to be a farmer, but they just didn't want them to be like, warlike.
Well, they didn't want them to reach their potential and be designers of their own destiny. And I was watching some YouTube drama slop yesterday, and part of it was H3H3. They had a German guy, and the German guy was going, we've studied our history and we know how evil we are, and so Americans are not good at studying the history. And I just kept thinking, like, you haven't studied your history. You've been subject to a propaganda program that's going on 70 years that's convinced you to demonize your own people. And it's sad to see Germans pick up that mantle and like demonize themselves and think that they're doing a good thing. It's really a brutal way to treat somebody. And yeah,
guilt. I mean, like this book talks about that they've studied the psychology of guilt manipulation, and that's what a big part of that is. So if you can manipulate an entire continent of people through faux guilt narratives, and that's really what all the social engineering is all about, is hitting those narratives.
Yeah, and it is connected to the wider geopolitical goals of the people manipulating even figures like Hitler into serving their ends. And I thought that was another fascinating thing that you touched on with Alex, is sort of how the Rothschilds were involved in the settlement of Israel 100 years before the 1948 declaration. So you talk a little bit about that, because that's something I think people don't understand enough, is that the Rothschilds are really central to the whole conspiracy, the whole global conspiracy. All really, it goes back farther, obviously, but like starting with that first Rothschild with the 5 sons and the different. I mean, you talk about intelligence agencies, you talk about the control of these central banks. It all goes back to this one family in Germany in like the 1600s.
Well, they were smart enough to really send out the family emissaries to the European countries to basically set up banks. And there's a great chapter in Quigley's Tragedy and Hope that's about the French banking system, the Paribas system, which was dominated and run by the Rothschilds. So eventually, and it wasn't all Rothschilds, there was also Protestant and Catholic banking as well. But eventually they came to dominate, and they set up this Paribas banking system. But to fast forward up to the time of the late 1800s, actually mid-1800s, and the 1860s, all the way into the 1890s, the nation-state of Israel was being planned.
Right.
They didn't know if they would eventually get a full-on nation-state. But Edmund Rothschild said, well, I'm going to start buying tracts of land. And he became an anonymous benefactor. He went under a code name, Nadav Yehuda. And so they didn't know who this person was. It was buying all this land. They were talking to a Turkish sultan who was happy to sell it.
Right. There's sort of absentee landowners that would live in Istanbul and owned tracts of land in Palestine where they'd get tax revenue, but it was a pittance. And so, when Rothschild comes along and goes, hey, I'll give you an exorbitant amount of money, of course they're going to say yes.
And according to the biographer here, who's not partisan, it's an official kind of biography. I mean, he doesn't put it like they really that the Rothschilds themselves thought it would be super political. Supposedly, he just wanted a bunch of religious sites that Jews could go and be pilgrims to.
Okay.
But then he meets with Theodor Herzl. He meets with other characters involved in political Zionism, and they try to talk him into it. Initially, supposedly, they weren't that interested in getting political because they were actually pretty European, and they thought, this is going to damage our name in Europe if we are seen as a sort of hyper-political, involved in the British imperial project of setting up this nation. So they didn't immediately get that, but eventually they came around to it, and they did put money into the settlement of Palestine, massive amounts of money into the 1930s. This is after Balfour Declaration. At that time, the first donation, I think 1931, they gave $40,000 to Chaim Weizmann and the project. They tried to buy the Wailing Wall, and they wanted to try to find the Ark of the Covenant and all this kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, the Grand Rabbi of Israel at that time actually told Edmund that he couldn't buy the Wailing Wall. So I don't know what the reason for that. The biography doesn't say. But after this time, though, they do begin gradually to buy more and more and more, and then eventually, I think my theory is that they realized that they were not going to get the recognition of the nation state of Israel until there was some event that would occur that forced remigration, and that came in waves of tens of thousands. Eventually, they got 500,000, 600,000 Jews into Israel after the 1930s and 40s, but the Tiny Mustache Man event helped to do that. And after World War II, it's because of World War II that 1948 the UN recognized Israel as because of World War II. So when you look at Quigley from that vantage point and you see him talking about the money that was put into funding him, aiding him, bringing him to power, giving him, as we said, like there's a whole chapter in Quigley on Tragedy and Hope on the dual strategy. And the dual strategy is that the British power structure was telling Hitler the whole time, we will secretly support you. We're not going to attack you. Go into Poland, go into Czechoslovakia, take the money, take whatever, take the loot. We're behind you, but we're going to have to tell the public that we're against you.
Right.
And after all this, they stabbed him in the back. They didn't keep supporting him. Then we got World War II. And why would we want World War II? Well, World War I was engineered, according to Quigley, by the same elite families and power structure to get the League of Nations.
Right.
The League of Nations didn't have any teeth. America opposed it. So, well, let's have a bigger war with a more villainous figure.
Right.
Then we'll have what we want, which wasn't just the nation state of Israel. That's one piece of an overall larger picture, which is, I think, what Changing Images of Man is about. And like, here's the thing. Everybody says, well, what is it, the Jews, or is it these people who are like theosophists, socialists? These projects work together because the socialist Zionist project, because Zionism is all socialism,
right?
Especially with Hess and Herzl and these characters, it's the same socialism as these people,
right?
So when you read like Moses Hess, he's not a theist in the way that you think of like a personal God external to you. He explicitly says, I believe in Hegel, process theology, pantheism, Spinoza. Spinoza was a Jewish pantheist. He says that's what our project is. God is the dialectic of everything happening in history. That's God, dialectical process. So he thinks that the dialectical process is moving man towards, in Hess's view, the establishment of a nation state that would be the beacon for world socialism.
Right.
Now, not everybody has that same idea, right? The Theosophists, they didn't really like the Judaic idea of it. They said, no, maybe it'll be Tiny Mustache Man. Maybe that kind of an idea will set up a socialist world government, fascist world government, whatever. But it ended up being none of those, and it's basically the Fabian socialist model, which blends perfectly with the Zionist model. It's the same stuff.
Right. And of course, a lot of the early settlers of the kibbutzes were socialists who had been driven out of the Pale of Settlement by the pogroms, and then they went and settled. And once the Tsar was overthrown, they took what they'd learned and went up and helped to establish the Bolshevik government, the communist government, through taking sort of the theories of Marx that they had been espousing previously. They put them into action in the kibbutzes and sort of learned how politically they could work out. Explain what you mean by Israel being just part of a much larger plan, because I think that's where people get stuck. They see Israel doing a lot of stuff, the Greater Israel Project, all that stuff. I always try to remind them that's just one part. And tell me if I'm wrong. My assumption is that they want Israel and specifically Jerusalem to be the capital of the global government. Yeah. It will be sort of inviolable. I always say globalism is sort of the marriage of communism and Zionism, where you have the nation state that's inviolable in Israel, but everywhere else is deracinated and the borders are empty. Is that what you mean when you say it's part of a larger project?
Yeah, I think that there's certain people like Moses Hess or a Herzl that would think that we'll set up a nation state, we will have the real beacon of world socialism that will save the world. And they actually speak of it in salvific ways. So like when they read Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, they say, oh, that's not really about some Messiah or some person. It's about the Jewish people and the eventual establishment of this nation state that will be the salvation. So they internalize the messianic prophecies. Not all of them. I'm just saying some. So I think for somebody like Moses Hess or somebody like that, or some of the Zionist ideologues, they believe in a political salvific ideology, which is very close to what we would say is kind of an antichrist ideology, because that's who would accept the antichrist. Right. Is somebody who believes that kind of an ideology. But I think other globalists that don't have any problem with those flavors, like they think of it more internationally and more of a who cares if it's Israel. I mean, Changing Images of Man says multiple times, like, all of the Western biblical ideas of God have to go. And people think, well, but what about what you're saying? Well, I don't think that the Zionist ideology, the religious ones, it's not classical theism like we think of it. It's process theology, which melds perfectly with the Theosophists. And the reason it's part of a bigger project is the whole world is intended by most of these people to go into some kind of a controlled technocratic agenda. So like Alex said, I mean, there is a 100-year plan that the Chinese have. I mean, I'm sure China doesn't really care about Israel. I think one of their people was just lambasting the Israeli people the other day, saying, we don't care about your Israel stuff. So most of the world doesn't really care about Israel's, greater project, Oded project, and all the Likud plan and all that. But of course, obviously, they have a huge amount of influence in the U.S. government with what did Netanyahu say? It's very easy to move. America, right? So I think we know this kind of stuff. But apart from particular like regions, the Middle East or whatever, there is this overall global plan that people have in the power structure that, again, you don't have to be wedded to or even care about it. There are plenty of anti-Zionist globalists like Brzezinski, somebody like that. He was like, Jews don't really like Brzezinski. Right. But George Soros, not a big fan of Israel. So it's bigger than this, but I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. Like, it does matter. I mean, the Rothschilds were a huge part of this, and they were kind of running the British Empire at one point. Right. So. After Waterloo. And I feel like a lot of people think when they think of conspiracies, they think that
the people in power are just omnipresent, omnipotent. They can do whatever the hell they want, whenever the hell they want. They have this list of things they're going to do, and they're just checking them off the list. That's not really how it is, though, right? They have plans. They try one thing. It doesn't quite work. They try another thing. Okay, let's, World War I didn't quite have the oomph we needed for the world government. Maybe we're missing a figure. Maybe we need that single figure to make the Satan of our new religion. We need a guy. How about Hitler? So, I mean, do you agree with that? That, it's not so much these people are just sort of have a plan for the world and we're all just helplessly watching. They're having to react to how humanity reacts. Some of their plans work, some of them don't. Some take longer than they think. It's not a foregone conclusion, is it?
Yeah, I don't think they knew for sure that the way that they wanted to goad, Hitler into World War II, that was necessarily going to work. I think that they strategized and planned it. There's some really great. They're somewhat disputed, but I think they're pretty revelatory. There's a great document called Red Symphony, and it's an interrogation of a guy named Christian Rakovsky. He was the Trotskyite socialist president of Bulgaria, and he was taken in by the NKVD because Stalin wasn't a huge fan of Trotsky. So he arrested him at one point, and the interrogations are all real. This one, some people debate it because it's so revelatory, but you basically have this lower level NKVD guy, I think his name's Gabriel, and he's interrogating Rakovsky, and he says, what were you thinking by opposing Stalin? What did you think you would get out of this? And the guy says, oh, well, you don't understand that, like, we're going to get another war. We're going to have another, there'll be another world war, and we're going to have eventually world socialism. And he mentions like some really prominent British spies like Sidney Riley, and he says, we're all working for the Rothschilds. If you don't know that. And right. The guy who's the sort of mid-level NKVD interrogator, he's like, how could we be working at the behest of banking capital?
Right.
We are socialist Marxists.
Right.
How could it blows his mind. And if you think that's outlandish, well, why would David Rockefeller be such a huge proponent of Harold Lasky, the most famous socialist in America? He studied under him. He wrote under him, promoted him. And, David Rockefeller wrote two famous New York Times editorials in the late 70s about how big of a fan he was of Mao. Really? Chase Bank was the first bank in China.
Right.
So there is no antipathy at that level between Marxism, socialism, and big capital. To go back to Spengler said it famously that there is no socialist revolution not funded by big capital.
Right. It's absolutely true. And I mean, not just big capital. I mean, the American government basically built the USSR during World War II. I mean, we weren't just sending them weapons. We were sending them factories and trains and absolutely everything. Why would we do that if they're our big enemy? More with Jay Dyer on the other side. Don't go anywhere, folks. More to come. All right, welcome back, folks. This is The War Room. Jay Dyer in studio with me. And, I hope the audience is like me and appreciates that while, yes, InfoWars tends to focus a lot on breaking news and political analysis of what's going on just in the immediate reality of planet Earth, we also have the leeway and the audience to appreciate that we can just sort of talk about history and how we got to this point and the whole timeline, not just sort of reacting immediately to everything. So, I think InfoWars is a very unique outlet in that regard, and I hope that you support us at thealexjonesstore.com, thealexjonesstore.com. I know it's been just ever since I started hosting a show on InfoWars, I always reveled in the ability to, I'm going to take a segment just to ramble about Roman history, and I know our audience will appreciate it and not go, get back to the news. They understand how all this ties in together, and actually the background is necessary to understand the present. If you don't know how we got here, how are we going to get out of the trap they're trying to put us in? So please do support this extremely unique and powerful outlet at thealexjonesstore.com. You can go to thealexjonesstore.com/Harrison if you want to let him know who sent you. Of course, Jay Dyer is the perfect person to have on in this regard. jaysanalysis.com, YouTube, Jay Dyer, and on X at J_D007. We just continued our conversation like we didn't even go to break. So I'm like, okay, wait, where did we drop off? Where did we leave off there?
Left off at Cobra Commander.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's how we started, actually.
When I came in here, they were Harrison was in here watching like old G.I. Joe clips, and I was cracking up because there's a really good one that you should find on YouTube or on TikTok or whatever, where Cobra Commander actually creates Cobra Coin as a competitor to the Federal Reserve. And the funny part of it is that everything that Cobra Commander is saying about the Federal Reserve being a scam is actually true.
That's awesome.
We're going to create Cobra Coin. The Federal Reserve is a scam.
But he's actually
Cobra's
right.
the good guy.
in this
that episode
narrative,
covers the
and then the G.I. Joe's like, we gotta prop up the dollar in the Federal Reserve.
Nothing more American than fiat currency. Absolutely. See, I never watched G.I. Joe as a kid, so I know. Really, I've watched more of Alex Jones pretending to be Cobra Commander than I've ever actually watched Cobra Commander. So I saw that. Yeah, I saw that TikTok video. The facade has fallen away, and they're just outright satanic now at this point. And it seems like obviously the market is open for people that aren't pushing that to come in and scoop up some of that market share. And I know a lot of good people are doing that. For people like myself who have young kids, how would you suggest we navigate the modern media landscape? Just watch stuff from our childhood, because that's basically what we do.
Well, it's funny though, because when I watch childhood stuff, like then you see the propaganda at that
right.
era,
But it's just not as bad.
It's not
like,
as bad.
It's
no,
still not
it's still
perfect.
pretty wholesome. I mean, we got so sick of movies that Jamie and I were watching a lot of noir films from the 1940s because I'd not seen a lot of those. And then what's amazing about those is once you know all like the World War II narrative, so many of those World War II films were also propaganda, especially like Humphrey Bogart films. Many of those are propaganda. In my third book that's about to come out, Esther Hollywood 3, I had a whole chapter on, there's actually a network of British intelligence spy fiction writers that came to write a lot of those movies in the 1940s. So even, Joan Crawford movies, Humphrey Bogart films, those are essentially films making America feel the necessity to be involved in on the side of Britain. And that was the job of some of those people coming over here for British intelligence.
It's wild how involved British intelligence has been in American media since World War I. Although I think it was World War II, they had an office in the Rockefeller building in New York City?
William Stevenson's office was there. His code name was Intrepid, and they set him up a specific propaganda office in Rockefeller Plaza.
Isn't that great? So a British intelligence had an office in America to propagandize Americans into joining the war on behalf of Britain, and we just went along with it.
Yeah, and they were the ones that helped Bill Donovan set up the OSS. So it's Noel Coward, it's William Stevenson from Canadian Intelligence, Ian Fleming, and Stevenson set up quite a bit of things like that. But they were really telling Bill Donovan, okay, here's how you structure your intelligence apparatus.
Right. You need to... And that's sort of the thing, isn't it? Any of these institutions, you have to go back to the guy who's done it before, which is why, you're talking about Protestant and Catholic bankers, even as far back as like the Middle Ages. But it's like, for them to get money, who'd they have to go to? How'd they learn the craft? There were people already doing it before them. So that's why when you trace this stuff up the pyramid, you honestly always end up at the Rothschilds. Because when you talk about intelligence and the way that, by setting up 5 banks in 5 cities all over Europe, they just sort of in a de facto way established a method by which information could be transmitted quickly and safely between all these countries. So they therefore established a better intelligence network than the countries that they were living in, which is why when, Rothschild went and started selling bonds after the Battle of Waterloo, everybody knew, hey, that guy's got the information. That guy knows more than we do. He's selling. We must have lost. That's how he, buys up the British economy. But that's sort of, to me, if you're tracing back the birth of intelligence, CIA to OSS to British intelligence to the Rothschild banking family.
Yeah, if you watch Wall Street, I don't know how cognizant Oliver Stone was when he put this in there, but the Gordon Gekko character, it's an excellent analogy of exactly what you're talking about, how when Charlie Sheen, who's the sort of blue-collar guy, and he goes to study under Gordon Gekko to become like the, psycho Wall Street guy with the big fat, Zach Morris cell phone.
The coolest guy in the world.
Yeah. What happens is Charlie Sheen thinks, oh, this is all about sitting at the desk and, spending all hours making the trades. And Gordon Gekko's laughing at him. And he's like, no, I want you to go get dirt on the guy. I want you to go sleep with this person. I want you to become an intelligence agent.
Right.
And you get the inside information. And then Charlie Sheen's like, that's insider trading. And Gordon Gekko just laughs at him like, yeah, that's how it works, dude.
Right.
So just like we were talking about with Waterloo, the older banking structure is essentially an intelligence apparatus. I think Interpol comes out of that.
Right.
Rothschild network as well. And so what they had figured out was secret societies are much like intelligence agencies, and they overlap with banking entities. And that's essentially what we have today is we're ruled by banker spies.
And
technocrats.
Spies working on behalf of bankers, because obviously you can have a lot of control economically as a bank, but you can't kill people. You need an intelligence agency to do that. So the intelligence agencies have formed as sort of the enforcement arm of the banking cabal that took power of the British Empire after the Battle of Waterloo.
Well, a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, a bunch of big stories came out. Alex reported at the time. It was in The Guardian. It was in all the big papers, HSBC, big, huge mega banks, hundreds of billions of dollars of laundering drug money.
Yeah.
How do you do that if you're not connected to intelligence agencies?
Right.
Well, obviously they are.
And when you look at the document that we've covered quite a bit, I call it the Eagle 2 document, but it's a leaked document that was made by the FBI talking about the CIA drug running operation, how it got started, and basically it says, at a certain point, this operation became so big, the CIA couldn't handle it, so it was control was given to Baron de Rothschild, and he was operating out of Paris with the, can't remember exactly what it is. It's not the Bank of International Settlements, but another organization like that basically took control of the drug running operation that had been the black budget, money generator for CIA.
Well, that's Gladio, and another intelligence bank connected to Gladio is Charles Hambro. And he was a Jewish British intelligence operative who started the Hambros Brothers Bank, which was directly tied into all the Gladio Vatican Bank scandals. So this is not antithetical. It's not like, well, is it the Jewish banking or is it the Vatican Bank? They're all tied together because it's a giant global network of organized crime. And if you study organized crime, and if you go listen to the interviews that I've done with Sammy the Bull, he's very candid now, many years after that life, of talking about all these networks overlapping and how you got to grease the skids and you got to be in with the politicians. And, he talks about, of course we work with the Jewish mafia where all the mafias work together. And so it's a big club, I'm not a huge fan of George Carlin, but I mean, that's But I mean, that's what Gordon Gekko represents there, right? And Gekko is a serpent, it's
right. So. Yeah, that's super interesting. And of course now, they're rigging NBA games. Apparently, the Italian mafia rigging NBA games. I don't know if you saw that the gambling ring.
I didn't, but that's nothing new. I mean,
right. I mean, this has been going on since the World Series in 1911, something like that.
Yeah.
So and of course we've heard people like Ted Gunderson say, "Hey, look, there may be a high value person that wants a child, and you got to know where to get a child for him. We got to break the law, but that's what we do. We're saving people's lives." So they really are able to justify anything and justify their, partnerships with criminal enterprises because, hey, they can do things other people can't, and we might need it for national security. It's really a very brilliant, excuse to keep it secret and be able to do whatever the hell you want. Intelligence agencies really are the engine that keeps this New World Order operation moving forward.
Yeah, and they were set up by at least the OSS, CIA were set up, as we said, by British intelligence. But British intelligence, the modern security services, were set up at the turn of the century by Fabian socialists,
right? Who
all had the same Milner socialist ideology. So, to go back to that point that I meant to mention about Israel, a lot of the British elite were not pro-Israel,
right?
But that doesn't immediately make them like good people, right? Yeah. So, for example, many of the British spies that are very well known, very famous, you have T.E. Lawrence, you have Gertrude Bell, St. John Philby. St. John Philby became a Wahhabi convert, right? And that was, whether he really believed it or I don't know, but he was working as a British intelligence operative with the Salafi, strain of Islam, so that the empire could have control and influence through that branch. And they ended up using them quite often because that's where we get this whole Al-Qaeda Mujahideen alliance that we use, and then Israel's now using that with Jolani and al-Nusra and taking down Assad in Syria, Timber Sycamore, all those operations. By the way, I was writing about Timber Sycamore in 2014 and got called all kinds of names and, oh, you're such a crazy tinfoil hat. And then it comes out in the New York Times, Timber Sycamore is the name of the project, billions of dollars. We didn't know the name of it.
What is that? Sorry, I'm blanking on what.
Yeah, just look up New York Times, Timber Sycamore. That was the name for the billions of dollars that were sent to topple Assad back.
Oh, okay. Yes, got it.
Remember 2014, 15, 16, like that time? And it was like, you can't Mossad the Assad, and everybody was... So that was what we were writing about, talking about. The White Helmets was one of these big propaganda operations that they were doing. They got an Oscar for the documentary. Right. And of course, George Clooney was a big promoter of all that. It's not just Saudi money, though. Look up Timber Sycamore, and you'll get the New York Times headline, and it says it came to an end. Well, it came to an end because they ended up eventually toppling Assad.
Right.
And they put Jolani in. Jolani was the head of al-Nusra back when they were trying to topple Assad, when the CFR was writing articles saying, we need Al-Qaeda in Syria. Yep, that's it. It's on the front page of the New York Times. But
Yeah, that's right.
They are Al-Qaeda.
Yep. And of course, ISIS was mostly Saudi Arabian. A lot of people actually out of Europe that were radicalized in the Saudi Arabian funded mosques there. But when you look at the history of the Saud family, I mean, it doesn't go back that far. And that was a project of British intelligence as well, right? A British and American intelligence setting up the Saud family, which was just, I mean, it was basically just a bunch of barbarians. This one strong man, got them all together. And it's been him or his sons or his grandsons running the entire country ever since. All of the princes, they're all direct descendants of this one King Saud, who, British intelligence picked as the vessel through which they would control the oil.
Yeah, the British carved up that whole area with the French, Sykes-Picot, and that's where we get Iraq from. We get Pakistan. We get Saudi Arabia. Those are all creations of the British Empire, and it was T.E. Lawrence that went and set up the Sauds. Mm-hmm. Gertrude Bell went and set up what was in Iraq. She's a pretty fascinating character. But what's interesting about those people is that they were not pro-Zionist.
Right.
They were Arabophiles. So amongst the British structure of the spies and the elites, you had these people that really loved Islam and Wahhabism, and which, as a woman, is really odd that Gertrude Bell would love Islam. But she was really into. She studied Persian, Farsi, and poetry, and Rumi, and all this stuff. So she was an oddball, but she was working directly underneath the British Foreign Office for the Middle East, which was headed up by a Chatham House, Royal Society, Royal Institute for International Affairs guy, answering directly to people like Milner and the Rothschilds.
Right. And, it was interesting. I was shown a clip from this sitcom out of the UK called Yes Minister. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one, but it was a clip from the 70s, and it's all has to do with, political stuff. And they say, well, are you going to go give a speech about Zionism? He says, yes, of course. And of course, I'm going to stand against it and blah, blah, blah. And it was weird because it was at the time in the 70s, I guess, it was just understood the average Briton and the entire British government was anti-Zionist, which was just kind of odd because you think there's always
labor governments usually.
And I think that's what it was. Yeah, it was sort of a reforming type of government that was in there. But it was interesting to me to see that in the 70s, it was just sort of assumed that if the British government addressed Israel in the UN, they would be against it, and they would be against Zionism. And people don't know that it was as early as, 40 years ago, that was the case in all of the UK. So things have changed quite a bit. And now you've got people, it's strange how all this just sort of happens and people don't notice the change.
Well, if you go back to the time of the Balfour Declaration, like I said, those British spies and the Royal Society elite, they were actually split between the pro-Arab Arabophiles and the Rothschild Zionist side of it.
Okay.
So they had kind of a division between them. You can even see this up into World War II when you have, the king is basically a Nazi. He marries Wallace Simpson marries the American woman. So there was still the split amongst that power structure in the UK. But when when the King David Hotel gets bombed, it gets bombed by people from the Irgun, the Stern Gang. That becomes basically the intelligence apparatus and the military for Israel. That was, I think, enough to tell the British that they wanted them out. But even to those periods that you're talking about, the Labour government was never really pro-Zionist. They were socialists, and if some of the socialists were, like Blavatsky and these kinds of characters, they don't care about Yahweh or the Bible.
Right.
So they don't have a problem saying we don't care about Israel. We just want world socialism. But then you have other people who are, rabid Zionists, maybe not so much in the UK, but yeah, I mean, ultimately they end up fighting the same wars that we do because there's a special relationship, and it's the same power structure that runs the UK and runs us. The only difference is that with Keir Starmer, who is an open Fabian Socialist, member of the Fabian Socialist Society, he's just an example of this hardcore technocratic worldview, rolling out the digital IDs, arresting people for tweets. All of that is explicitly what the hardcore socialists want. But not everybody is as hardcore, but that doesn't mean that they're good guys because they're, you can be anti-Zionist and be a bad guy.
Right. It's funny that you have to say that, but I was actually arguing about that with a guy on X the other day because I had people reach out to me, a month ago and say, how can you like Charlie Kirk? He's a Zionist. And it's you think that is my litmus test? If you're a Zionist, you're good, and if you're not, you're not. It's no. I got a lot of other concerns. That's a very minor concern as far as I'm as far as I go.
I'm about to cover a book called, it's a famous historical text. It's the collaboration between the Zionists and the Nazis.
Right.
But there's a book on the Havara Agreement. Yeah. So they had to make these, I'm not saying they had the same worldview. I'm just saying they had to make these plans and these deals.
They did kind of have the same worldview in a lot of ways, right?
In certain ways,
you're
right.
You're talking about Kalergi. I think he was the one that coined the term master race. Maybe it wasn't him, it was somebody else. But, a lot of the ideas from Kalergi were sort of, it was Hitler going, hey, they're not the...
No, we are, yeah.
Yeah, they're not the master race. We're the master race. He didn't come up with it. He just took it for himself.
Kalergi says that in Practical Idealism, Jews will be the master race of Europe. He said everybody else will be mongrelized.
Yeah.
His words, not mine.
Yeah.
But yeah, Hitler had a different idea that the Teutonic, Germanic people would be the master race. And again, from the Orthodox Christian perspective, like, we don't see Hitler as a good guy just because he was opposed to usury and this kind of stuff. I mean, so were all the Orthodox kings and saints. Like, they were opposed to usury. Like, you didn't have first 1,000 years of Christendom opposed usury.
Right.
So setting the bar kind of low to just be like, I'm with whoever's against usury. Okay, well, I guess you're against the papacy then, because the papacy's pro-usury. But yeah, I mean, the motivation we would say as Orthodox Christians that the mantle of Christian civilization after the fall of Byzantium, we believe that kind of fell to Russia.
Right.
Not that it was perfect, but it was kind of the preserver of the state apparatus of Christianity.
Well, it was the third Rome, right? In the sort of last surviving.
Yeah, exactly. The continuation, and then when that fell to the Bolsheviks, who many of which were Jewish, obviously Talmudic, they murdered the royal family on purpose in a ritual sacrifice. So like that leaves a vacuum, and it's odd the only monarchy that's really powerful is the British monarchy.
I was going to ask you about that, because it seemed to me like that's what happened, is that the Rothschilds sort of took over the British economy and therefore the British Empire, and then sort of systematically, 100 years later, they're the only powerful monarchy left, and everything else is just sort of a symbolic, if they even exist. Obviously, Russia went down. France went down. That may have been related, but obviously became before. But yeah, it's like very clearly within 100 years, you have every other monarchy falling.
Well, the same motivation that moves Napoleon to attack Russia, same motivation that moves Hitler to attack Russia. And I'm not saying that makes Stalin or that makes communism good. The idea is to wipe out Christian civilization. And right. Even if you read Quigley, who is not, I'm not promoting him as a good guy, he's an admission text. Quigley says that the purpose of the two world wars was to destroy the remnants of Christian civilization, which he calls authority-based civilizations. He says the modern world will be based on democracy and markets and consensus.
Yeah.
And the idea of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a Catholic civilization, and Russian Orthodox Christianity and the Tsar is a Christian civilization. He says those have to go to have the new system.
Right. It's all so fat. Like, again, we could just get into all this stuff endlessly. The creation of the CIA and the Dulles brothers and their involvement in like the Treaty of Versailles. I mean, this stuff is endlessly fascinating. I know we only have 2 minutes left, but let's touch on some modern and ongoing stuff here. What is your take on the Board of Peace to oversee Gaza and the inclusion of Tony Blair and these people in sort of an international body to oversee this land?
Well, I mean,
I don't know what to think of it.
That's nonsense. He's a Fabian socialist. He comes out of the same structure of the Third Way. Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, they were at the same time under Quigley and people that have this kind of Third Way ideology. The Third Way ideology was this idea that you could combine Western capitalism with Eastern communism, and we would get this product. Dialectics, right? Dialectical synthesis. And that's really no different than the Fabian socialist model, which is the people above them anyway. I mean, this is. I mean, he's Clinton's mentor. Right. So when I see Tony Blair and people like that there, who's Labor Party, it's the Fabian socialists that renamed themselves the Labor Party.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
No, that's them. And the fact that they're like don't care about Israel doesn't mean that they're good guys. They're just more openly sort of technocratic.
Yeah.
So you can have an internationalism that is like Israel focused, or you can have an internationalism that's like socialist focused and doesn't care about Israel.
And
or you can have a Chinese one.
And there is sort of a weird sort of synthesis, right? Because Tony Blair is obviously very good friends with Larry Ellison, who's helping to put on all this technocratic control, and is very pro-Israel. So it's different factions, but they find common cause and work together quite a bit. Your new book is coming out. When can people expect your book? What's coming up for you next?
Well, and to be clear about that, in terms of like, I'm not saying Blair is anti-Zionist. No, Blair was involved with Bush in fighting all those same wars for the Likud and all that. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's always elements within the Labor Party, like Jeremy Corbyn, who was very, very anti-Zionist, but attacked in the British and Western media. I don't agree with Jeremy Corbyn, but I'm saying that he wasn't attacked until he was like making these sort of public anti-Zionist positions. But the book is Esther Hollywood 3, and it covers a lot of the big things that I never got to in the previous texts. So we cover some pretty big hitting blockbuster type films, a lot of Christopher Nolan stuff that I never got to, a lot of Marvel stuff. We go pretty deep into Kabbalah, esotericism, Lovecraft films, B movies, and Antichrist films. So Esther Hollywood 3 is going to be a unique installment in the trilogy. It's the finality of the trilogy there.
It's the way to find out the hidden secret meanings behind the movies that you may love. So if you want a deeper appreciation for what the filmmakers were really trying to do, you got to check out the first two Esoteric Hollywood books, and the third one's coming out soon. You can find all of those and more at jaysanalysis.com. YouTube is Jay Dyer, J_D007 on X. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Hail Cobra! Hail Cobra!
We'll be right back, folks. Don't go anywhere.